So the last time I was with people in this kind of a setting was at Forest Grove. And I wasn't a conference minister. Like 3 years ago, that is how long it has been since I was in a place like this, doing something like this with people like you. And I had a full, like the other day, I went out on my balcony to feed the birds, and it was cool, and it was like that Oregon fall day kind of feeling. And I had this like full body memory of like driving in the car to Eugene with you and visiting the people at Wright. And that realization, like I haven't done this before. And I just want to like sit with that for a minute, right? It has been a long ass 3 years. So we can switch to the next slide. I know we saw this morning. I didn't know that we were going to do that this morning, but I wanted you to see the team that put together our website did so much work. And this was something that Adam Hands wanted done when he was moderator, and we didn't get it done under Adam. But I also wanted you to see this. One of the greatest compliments that I got about this website, which is beautiful, and all of my colleagues in the Council of Conference Ministers, many of them, some of them have great websites, but many of them are very jealous. One of the greatest compliments that I got was, it really says who you are and what matters to you. And so I'm going to start this meeting the way I start all of our staff meetings, the way we start our board meetings. We are the United Church of Christ in Southern Washington, Oregon, and Southern Idaho. That is what the Central Pacific Conference is. That is who we are. And we are together the United Church of Christ in Southern Washington, Oregon, and Southern Idaho. Next slide. And then if you scroll down the page, you get to this. We are called to foster stronger connections, nurture spiritual growth, amplify our prophetic voice, and become an anti-racist conference. And every staff meeting, we begin with this. We talk about these priorities. Which of these priorities are we lifting up this month? In every one of our board meetings now under Vicki Stifter, we've begun to organize our agenda for the meeting around these priorities. So let's talk about amplifying our prophetic voice. Let's talk about nurturing spiritual growth. This is who we're called to be. And this came out of this body, the United Church of Christ in Southern Washington, Oregon, and Southern Idaho. The Starling Project. No, next slide. And I also want you to see, if you click on this Locate a Church button, next slide, you get this amazing interactive map that people can find you in your church, and they can have these drop-down menus and have all of these different UCC covenant affiliations. So I need a church that is open and affirming. And you can also click on multiple boxes, I think, so that you can say, I want a church that's open and affirming in creation justice, or I'm really passionate about, I need a church that's immigrant welcoming. And then you can find all the churches that meet those criteria in our conference and see them all on a map and see which ones are closest to you. And that for me is one of the most exciting things about the website. No, next slide. Thank you, website team, again. So this slide usually comes at the end of things, and it's sort of like an afterthought. And I wanted to start with it tonight. So here are our 24 men. Thank you, Frank, who have been serving in ministry over 50 years. And some of you are here. Thank you for being here. If you are one of these, would you mind standing up so we can recognize you? Frank and Carl. Thank you for your service and for being present, for being in this covenant together. Next slide. And then these are our milestone anniversaries of 50, 45, 40, 35. And I will say this is a little different than what was in your packet because we noticed that John Paul Davis, who is 25 years, wasn't in the list. And so we added him for tonight. And so if you are one of these ministers, will you please, and you're here, will you please stand up? Thank you for your faithfulness. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that have been going on in this conference over the past year. And every year I go through all my notes from the year, and I hope that I haven't missed anyone. So I'm going to give you a moment to tell me if I missed somebody. But these are 4 of our ministers who were called to set to churches, not interim positions, in the conference in the past year. J.J. Crow at Hillsdale, Jessica Shine here at First Congregational Eugene, Andy Wade at Bethel White Salmon, and Heather Miner just a couple weeks ago at Wright. Yes, thank you. Next slide. So these are people who retired or changed careers in the last year. And I realized this morning that my pastor is leaving. This will be her last Sunday, next Sunday, the 2nd. And so Sarah Rosenaw, 10-3, will be her last Sunday at Waverly. And each one of these stories, each one of these people's stories is full of twists and turns, some of them a lot of pain. Getting to the point of leaving sometimes is really painful. And there are 11 names on this list, and we have 40 churches. We also, in October of last year, just after our annual meeting, McCall Community Church chose to leave the United Church of Christ. And I want us to just, for a minute, and I also have my puppy dog on here, because I had some personal transitions this year too, and Debbie as well, right? November of last year, just after the annual meeting, I lost my dog, and many of you, like me, live alone. My husband lives in St. Louis during the pandemic. Lucia was the only warm body that I touched for 5 months. And so, like, losing our pets can sometimes really, really matter. And then my grandmother in February, my mother-in-law in July, Debbie's husband right after that. And many of you have had deaths in your lives during the past year, as well as big, big changes in your own lives and in your churches. I've been thinking a lot about the Queen lately. And this was in 1992, and she got in a lot of trouble, actually, for this speech. where she said to the Parliament at her Christmas speech, "It has turned out to be an annus horribilis." And I think for a lot of us, it has turned out to be a annus horribilis. 3 years of a lot of change and and that's why we have the chapel, and that's why we're going to have some lament in church tomorrow. And to be able to just sit with the fact that, like, for many, many of us in our churches and in this room, it has been an annus horribilis. Next slide. And so I want to give you a couple metaphors to think about. The first metaphor is that of a mobile. This is a peace crane mobile. And if you think about a mobile, and that mobile is well balanced, and you remove a piece from that mobile, or you add a piece to that mobile, the mobile is going to take a while to get back into balance. And it doesn't matter whether you've lost a piece or added a piece, or lost a piece and added a piece. The pieces are different sizes, and that mobile is going to be out of balance. And many of us in the conference are in that space. And the conference sometimes feels to be in that kind of a space. And another thing about this moment is that many of us have lost our emotional margins. So after 2.5 years of living in the pandemic, we used to have this buffer around our emotions that allowed us to sort of get jostled and we could handle it. And now the mobile is moving and shaking, and hard edges are bumping up against each other, and pieces are bumping up against each other, and we don't have the margins that we used to have. And so the bump that used to be okay is now definitely not okay. And so as you live in this tipsy-turvy mobile time without good margins on your emotions, I want you to be easy with each other, as easy as you can be. The other metaphor that I want to give you, which I gave to the board a few weeks ago, is, next slide, is that of a boat. This is the Nate Creek swimming hole at Camp Adams. And that's a boat just in the water. And I think for many of us, we feel like the boat is out of balance, or we are in troubled water that is fast moving. And one of the things about camp is that if you're not a good swimmer, you have to wear a life vest, because it's hard to swim in that kind of water. And I think that this, for many of our churches, has been a year when, if you're still with your head above water, you're doing good. If you have been rowing and you haven't made any progress, you're doing okay. Even little tiny incremental progress this year is good progress. And I think that in the conference setting, it has felt like we haven't made a lot of sort of big steps in the past year. And I think part of it is because of this, because the boat is still trying to find balance, and because we're swimming in troubled waters. And swimming in troubled waters takes more energy and is harder, and you can't move as fast or as far. And often you wish there was a lifeguard. And so I wanted to give you those two metaphors to let you think about this moment that we're living in. I also wanted to say one more thing. We just had this UCC summit on on living in a post-pandemic world, which the Reverend Piwa Langeni gave us a different phrase. She said, we'll never be in a post-pandemic phrase, but we are pandemic informed now, that our lives are pandemic informed and our churches are pandemic informed. And we are living with the information that we got from the pandemic, whatever phase we are at in the pandemic. And then the Reverend Elizabeth Dilley reminded us that in systems theory, third years are always the hardest. That often in a system, the third year, a new pastor, things are difficult in their third year. I remember after we got through the third year of my marriage, my husband, who got divorced in the third year of his first marriage, took a deep breath and was like, I think we're going to be okay. And we are in the third year of the pandemic. So of course it's hard, because third years are hard. And that's where we are. So I wanted to just give you an opportunity to take a breath and be easy with yourselves. There's been a lot of change and a lot of sort of topsy-turviness in our world. And if you are still dog paddling and can have your head above water, and if there's someone close to you who doesn't, maybe you can pull them up. But if you don't feel like you've made any progress, you're still here, and that's a good thing. I always want to focus on the mission priorities. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about our 4 mission priorities. This is Mary Coons and the quilt, which she made for this annual gathering about love, trust, and responsibility, living life in covenant, which we've been covering up with a screen. But you'll get to see it tomorrow, those of you who are on this side of the sanctuary who haven't been able to see it. I've been going around the conference preaching about covenant, and our Committee on Ministry has been digging into covenant and writing covenants with our ministers in compliance with the 2018 Manual on Ministry. And if you're a minister and you haven't written a covenant yet, you're going to have the Committee on Ministry is going to be coming to you saying, hey, can we write a covenant with you? And that has strengthened our connections. Just talking about covenant and thinking about covenant and reminding ourselves about what we're trusting for and what we're responsible for and how we're living together. I think this has been one of the big ways that we have fostered stronger connections this year. In nurturing spiritual growth, our camps were back this year and were places where people were able to come together and nurture their spirits, people who were young and people who were old. And this was when the week that I was at camp, an owl showed up. One of the things, that was our last circle with the kids. We were all circled up, and then the kid next to me shouted, and we turned around and there was an owl right there in the tree, and all the kids huddled over, and it just stood there and watched us for a while. This is Pilgrim Cove, for those of you from Oregon who may not know those 3 crosses. But our camps were places of spiritual growth this year for the first time in a while. And the other thing that we learned, though, is that the animals thrived when we weren't there. And so there were lots and lots of animals to greet us at camps this year. Amplifying our prophetic voice, there has been some quiet work that has been done in the wider church ministries and justice and witness ministries teams. And they've been having conversations with themselves about what it means to do their work and how their work connects to this mission priority of amplifying our prophetic voice. And one of the things about that kind of sort of ruminating work is that you don't always see it right away. But I believe that we are going to look back on 2022 and we are going to say something changed in wider church ministries and justice and witness ministries. And that we're going to say it happened because of the conversations that they had with themselves this year. And so just watch out. And I want to say a huge thank you to John Boonstra and Jeannie Randall Bodman, who chaired those teams this year and led those conversations and dug into those questions and pushed back with the board at the board retreat. And I think laid some really important groundwork for how we are going to amplify the prophetic voices of our members, not have the conference be saying, this is what we think is important, but amplifying the prophetic voice. So finally, becoming an anti-racist conference. We already learned this morning from Vicki that the board contracted with Carla Gary of Consulting by Design and performed this audit of the board and all of the ministry team members. And nearly 80% of the people who received those written surveys responded to them. And I'll tell you that there were a bunch of questions that you had to write answers to. It wasn't just, choose ABC. It was like written responses. And it took a lot of time to do those responses. The person who took the longest took 4 hours. And the average was about an hour to an hour and a half of our ministry team members, like spending time answering the questions from the survey. And I want to give you some of the key takeaways that I saw in this report. And the board, part of the board's work this year is going to be digging into the reports that we got back from Carla Gary and really thinking about what does this mean for the work of the conference setting of the church, not the church setting, local church setting, but what does it mean about the conference setting, our ministry teams, our committees, our committee on ministry? What does it mean about the work of the conference? How do we become an anti-racist? Or what's the beginning of the map for becoming an anti-racist conference? So here are some of the key takeaways. Next slide. The first one. One of the things that came out of this was that there is a strong commitment to this mission priority. In the reports, there were people who were lifted up as having been champions, and yet there was this overwhelming response to this mission priority and to this priority of getting this audit done. Now, I want to just speak to an experience that we had this afternoon in this space. Because two of the champions who were lifted up were Liz Durant and Linda Jaramillo. As people who have carried this call for anti-racism in this conference. And here was where I was going to say, we got it now. There's a lot of people who are lifting it and carrying it. And there's a board and a committee on ministry and other people who are carrying it. And then we messed up again today. And we required Linda to carry it for us again, right? With the nominations committee and her lifting up. Do you realize that all of the people? And I've had some conversations with people around the edges about that. And the nominations committee is going to be looking at, like, what are the structures that are in place that caused us to miss the boat on that particular piece. But I also had Tara Wilkins took me aside and said, we should have paused. Like, we just heard that. and then just moved on. And I'm sorry that I didn't stop us and say, let's take a moment. Let's at least say a prayer that we can be better in the future. And so I will say, I do believe that we have so many more people who are on board with becoming anti-racist in this conference, and that Liz and Linda do not have to carry it. And we can do better. So next one. We have got to commit, and we committed in the budget that we passed today to spend money on DEI training for our ministry teams and our boards. We have done some DEI, for those of you who don't know, as diversity, equity, inclusion. There are other ways of naming that. It doesn't have to be diversity, equity, inclusion training. It needs to be training that helps us become more anti-racist, helps us understand what's going on in ways. And I was really glad when I saw that only 12% of the respondents had none or very little familiarity. And most of that was them saying themselves, like, I actually don't know a lot about this. But 34% demonstrate a passing familiarity. And so that's almost 50% of the leaders of this conference who didn't have a good understanding of what we're even talking about when we talk about anti-racism. And so one of the things that we are going to do going forward is to make sure that everybody gets some basic training, some basic understanding, and that we do it, that we pay somebody outside the conference, that it's not something that we think somebody inside the conference can do, but that we actually bring in an expert who can help us. And that going forward, then new people who come on board are also expected to be a part of that, are also expected to do that training. So we'll do everybody this year, and then begin to build a culture where we have an understanding. And that was part of the budget that we passed today, was saying that we would have this commitment. And then I think the other really huge thing that came out of this that was spoken to in the reports that we got back is that we are white. And we live in states that are white by design, that were created white on purpose. Oregon, in our charter, said this will be a white Protestant utopia. Like, it was designed this way. And so we're not going to fix this by diversity and tokenizing, right? The only way that we're going to fix it in states that are as white as we are is for all of us to have a change of heart. For us to say, create in me a clean heart, O God. When the psalmist prays that, a heart was the place where you thought. It was the place of your being. And we need to change our culture. And that is longer and harder work, so that we can be spaces where people aren't tokenized, where leaders of color are lifted up, and where the culture supports them, and where Linda doesn't have to say from the pew, hey, right? I'm a queer guy, and I know what it's like to always be the person who says, can we say our pronouns, right? It's exhausting, let me tell you that. And so we have got to change the culture, and that is huge, huge long-term work. And that was a big takeaway from this, that diversity is not going to be our way out. that it's going to be culture change that is going to be our way out. So that's the end of my state of the conference thing. I wanted to talk just a minute about the Heunemann Awards. So I asked Debbie if she would give us the names of the last 5 people who got Heunemann Awards. So in 2021, it was Hector Lopez. And in 2020, it's Chuck Curry. 2019 was Pat Ross. 2018 was Wilbert Hardy. And 2017 was Lynn Smouse Lopez, and stop there. And so I first just want to celebrate Hector and Chuck and Pat and Wilbert and Lynn. These people who were lifted up by us as people who care about interfaith work, who care about justice, who live the spirit that Heunemann was in this conference. And I got to meet somebody who knew him a couple weeks ago, which was great. So I want to just first say, let's give a round for and this year we didn't get any nominations. And the board chose not to give a Heunemann Award this year because we didn't have any nominations. And so I want you, there's one more slide or one more thing on this. I want to thank each one of you for being the church that God needs for today. One of the things about the world that we live in now is that there are fewer and fewer big leaders. There are a lot more small leaders. And I want to thank you for being the church we need for today, each one of you. Because we need you now more than ever. And that is the end of my conference ministers report. There's one more slide.